Hey, this is Kyle Stowers, and you're listening to Fish on First.
Welcome into Fish on First Live, partnered with Foul Territory Network. I'm your host, Jeremiah Geiger. Joining me today is Eli Sussman. We have a lot to talk about on today's live stream, so hopefully you hop in the comments. Let us know your thoughts. We're going to talk about the World Baseball Classic. Of course, that's on a lot of people's mind. But Eli, we do have some unfortunate news that we have to lead the show off with, and that is Adam Mazur is going to miss the entire 2026 season. He underwent UCL reconstruction surgery performed by Dr. Keith Meister. Just right off the bat, what's your main takeaways from this blow, from this injury?
Well, I had a bad feeling about it as soon as they were saying that he was going to visit the doctor, Dr. Meister, a few days prior to that. That's always a bad sign when you go directly to the guy that performs all the TJ surgeries in order to get that intimate opinion. If people aren't familiar, this is now the preeminent TJ guy, the guy for fixing any sort of UCL damage to somebody's elbow. He's become the new poster. He's become like the new go-to doctor for that. It used to be James Andrews for so many years, and James Andrews finally retired, and now Dr. Keith Meister he's the best in the business at this point. He's the one that fixed Sandy's elbow a couple of years ago and Yuri's elbow a couple of years ago as well. So the Marlins seem to have a level of comfort with him in particular. Now Mazur going under the same process. As you mentioned, it is they're not calling it straight up Tommy John because they have the internal brace aspect to it, where they feel that he was a candidate based on the particular nature of his tear, that they think that could expedite the recovery a little bit compared to the usual Tommy John. It's something that gives him at least a puncher's chance of being ready for opening day next year. I think the most likely outcome is that he's slightly delayed coming out of spring training in 2027. It's a guy that I was probably a little bit lower on ever since compared to the consensus when the Marlins acquired him. Like, he was, to me, a pretty clear second piece in that Robbie Snelling deal in exchange for Tanner Scott going to the Padres. And I think with him, what stands out is he checks some of the boxes you like as a starter. He has a very deep pitch mix, and he has one notable pitch in his slider that at times looked like it was developing to a plus pitch. But overall, like, it wasn't a clear path for him to get whiffs. Like, if you look at his major league track record now, parts of 2 seasons, really towards the very bottom in terms of strikeout rate, even with all those offerings that he has. As a guy that, watching him in the minors, his control has always been very good, but he's somebody that was more control over commands. I didn't feel like he was somebody that spotted his stuff like precisely enough to have it translate to the major league level. And honestly, for a lot of last year, wasn't even translating at the AAA level. He was a very ordinary year that he had at AAA last year. That's why he didn't get called up until pretty late in the season. So he was somebody that still had a lot of question marks, despite already having a decent amount of time in the majors. What I will say is that he did look decent early on in spring training. He did put on some weight. This is the bulked up version of him. He was as thin, a rail thin guy as anybody in the Marlins organization as recently as last year. He did add some weight, and it's pretty ironic because he was talking about how that was so important to keeping him healthy moving forward. And then all of a sudden he has, for a guy that never had been on the injured list as a pro. That's the irony here, is that he never had any injury issues these past 3+4 seasons as a professional. And then all of a sudden he's one that keeps him out the entire year. So I'll sum up by saying that you just never know, like, which pitcher is going to tear up their elbow at any time. Unfortunately, it seems like if you stick around long enough, it's going to happen at least once during the course of your career. And there's really no common thread at this point. It's just, but the level of intensity that guys throw at, and all the effort that they exude when they're pitching. It's just, it could happen to anybody at any time. And that's why teams need to plan on using way more than the typical 5 starters over the course of the season.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate for a guy like Mazur because and the Marlins, when you look at the way their rotation is set up to start the year, you have Ryan Weathers leave the organization. You have Edward Cabrera leave the organization. And right off of those trades, you needed depth. And they go out, they sign Chris Paddock. I know people have been talking about Robbie Snelling maybe making the opening day roster. I don't see that happening just yet. I think he's a 1 month, 2 month in kind of call up. But Mazur was somebody who provided that spot start option, kind of like he did last year. He made 6 starts. And although he wasn't necessarily impressive, if the Marlins were in a pinch, they could call him up. He could give them 5 decent innings, 4 or 5 solid innings of work. And now that option's off the table. Valente Beozo has departed the organization. That kind of 5th back end starter that the Marlins have seemed to utilize over the last couple of years, Mazur, in my mind, was slotted to be that guy because he doesn't really have anything left to prove in AAA. It's just about whether he can be serviceable at the major league level. And now that depth is tested again with those departures from the offseason. You're looking at the projected starting rotation right now. You have Sandy, Yuri, those guys are mainstays. And then Chris Paddock didn't really have a spectacular year last year. It's a bounce back deal. Try to prove a lot of people wrong. Max Meyer, Braxton Garrett hasn't pitched since 2024. Is Max Meyer a starter? There's a lot of question marks with this rotation now. And I'm curious as to see how it looks at the end of spring training, whether it's going to change drastically midway through the year.
Right. To me, Mazur was, in my opinion, about 7th on the rotation depth chart behind these 5, behind Sandy, Yuri, Paddock, Max, and Braxton. And Jansen Junk, who had a little bit of an injury setback, he's now gradually building up. He finally made his first multi-inning appearance. I feel like Junk would have been the first man like put into, especially if it's a short-term issue with one of those previous 5 guys. I feel like Junk was the next guy up. And even though, as I just said, I hold Snelling into a much higher regard than Mazur moving forward, the roster politics is a factor here. The fact that Mazur's on the 40-man roster, they've already used one of his minor league options. Like, this is the way that a lot of organizations realistically go about it, where it's, you want to find out what you have in the guys that don't have much to prove or much to learn in the minors anymore. We want to put them in positions to sink or swim and contribute right away. And then once those options either don't perform or have any sort of physical issue, then that's when you really get the sexier call-ups usually. So to me, I agree with you that he was slated to pitch even more this upcoming year than he did the previous one at the big league level. And so now without him, they're going to hold on to him over the course of the season. They'll store him on the 60-day IL throughout the course of this. And Snelling is now that's helpful to Snelling because that opens up a 40-man spot whenever they want to use it. I feel like this means that Snelling his debut could be even more imminent than it was before, as a direct consequence of losing somebody that was lined up in this particular spot. Yeah, other than that, I mean, it helps that some of these other starters have looked good in spring training for what it's worth. And it's honestly not worth much, but it's better to show promising signs than not. Paddock is like the best example. You were being very kind in saying that you didn't have the best 2025 season. Yeah, he was kicked out of the rotation with the Tigers by the end of the year. He was like a forgotten man. And that's why the Marlins were able to get him for such a discounted rate. But he's looked really sharp in spring training, in terms of his comfort level with all his different pitches, and the fact that, like many other Marlins pitchers we saw last year, the team is working a little bit with his arsenal in ways that they think is going to lend itself to better results moving forward than they had last season. And Max I think we should touch on Max a little bit, where the fact that he has been the best of the bunch to this point in this spring. He's coming off a game where I think he struck out 8 guys against the Astros in his previous outing. He was absolutely lights out in that game. And over the course of the spring, it's reminiscent of, I guess, last year's spring training with him, actually, where he looked as sharp as anybody heading into the season. And then things changed once he got the injury pretty deep into the season. But if Max stays healthy, then maybe this is finally his chance to really establish himself as a starter, which he's botched those opportunities to do so the past couple of years. But things are pointing in the right direction with Max, at least.
Yeah, with Max Meyer, I think it's interesting because the other day against the Astros, I was really curious as to how the fastball looked because going back to last spring training, that was one of my keys was how is Max going to adapt and tweak his fastball under Daniel Moskis, director of pitching Bill Hazel. Are they going to make any adjustments to not necessarily his arsenal? I know they added the sweeper in there. They wanted to develop a consistent changeup, but when you're throwing your slider as your bread and butter pitch all the time, a good Major League Baseball player is going to hit it. And we saw that, I think it was against the A's a season ago. I was actually covering the game in the press box, and Meyer threw his slider a bunch of times, and the A's just sat on it. They homered 3 times off his slider. So when you overuse a certain pitch, it's going to get hit. So that's why the fastball for me is so important to develop. And the problem with Max Meyer's fastball for all the listeners out there, it's just so flat. Now, Meyer throws hard. He'll throw 95, 96, but it doesn't have the movement that you like to see from other pitchers around the league who have elite fastballs, as we call them. And going back to that start against the Astros, you look at the averages. He averaged 94.9 miles an hour on the fastball, just 15 inches of induced vertical break. So still the same kind of profile that Meyer has been the last couple of years. I think in spurts, in one inning at a time, you see that fastball tick up and it will go 97 with 17, 18 inches of vertical break. And you're like, that's why I think Meyer is better suited for the bullpen, because not to mention, he hasn't ever pitched a full season in a Marlins uniform yet. This is a guy that was drafted back in 2020. So we're talking about health and Mazur going down for the year. Max Meyer's comfortably in the rotation, I think, as we speak, but he's got to also stay healthy, not just produce and show that he can be a viable option, but he's got to stay on the mound because too often it feels like he's missing time with injury.
Yeah. So he's going to have a wide open opportunity, at least at the start of the year. And that was, this just goes back to the trades that they made. The fact that they doubled up. We were all surprised that they doubled up on trading both Eddie and Weathers over the course of this offseason. And they have less margin for error now with this Mazur injury, but thankfully that those guys at the top of the food chain in this group are still all right. And Max is the one that definitely has the most to gain potentially this year because of that opportunity. So let's see if he runs with it. But yeah, with that being said, day off from the Marlins in spring training today, and then they'll get back at it tomorrow. So we'll have that covered on future streams. But I think we wanted to dedicate the bulk of the show to talking about the WBC and everything that we saw in group play, especially from Marlins players becoming pretty big central part of those storylines in several different pools. So we'll get into that in a moment. Jeremiah, why don't we tell everybody a little bit first about Fox One and the ongoing promotion that they have with us.
All of our World Baseball Classic coverage is brought to you by our friends over at Fox One. Stream all your Fox favorites together live in one place, including all WBC games over the next few weeks. And after that, the best MLB action all season long. From the WBC through the World Series to the World Cup to NASCAR and IndyCar, with Fox One, you get it all live. Start your 7-day free trial today. Offers are subject to change. Download Fox One today and stream the World Baseball Classic live March 6th through the 14th. Go to fox1.com for complete terms and conditions. Fox One, streaming now.
Very well done. Let's take a look at these dudes. This is the Marlins WBC participants entering the tournament. Started with 10, and now I put some X's over the ones that were eliminated so far. So 7 guys. We started with 10. Sandy Alcantara is still alive. Augustine Ramirez, both of the Dominican Republic. The trio of Canadians moved on. That's Owen Casey, Otto Lopez, Liam Hicks, Javier Sinoja with Venezuela, and Jacob Marcy with undefeated Italy. That gave the USA a heart attack when they upset them and put them on the verge of elimination. So the ones that were crossed off, that's Yidi Cape with Cuba, Ian Lewis with Great Britain, and Jared Serna with Mexico right there. I think we want to start off with Canada, don't we, though? Because that's where 3 Marlins representatives and Owen Casey absolutely lit it up over the course of this pool play. Those 4 games in Pool A. Canada ends up winning that pool and going 3-1 overall. Casey is a guy that I've been pretty blunt that I'm just a little skeptical about what exactly the hit tool is going to look like against Major League pitching. So didn't exactly face Major League pitching over the course of that pool play, but the guys that he did face, he dominated and made a good defensive play too. So, just hype up this guy, give him his flowers that he deserves for how he performed these last few games.
Yeah, Casey's been on fire for Team Canada, and this is a guy that to start Grapefruit League play really struggled. He wasn't hitting the ball, and there were some murmurs, on Twitter within the fan base. Well, is Owen Casey the real deal? And he goes to the WBC, leaves camp, and he's just played terrific, especially at the plate. Had a home run, 3 doubles, lots of extra base hits. And he's put Canada into a position now where you're looking at the quarterfinal matchup versus the United States tomorrow in Houston to advance in the World Baseball Classic. So, if you're a Marlins fan, there's a lot to root for, both from a team perspective and an individual perspective, because you love to see the Marlins do well in the World Baseball Classic. And certainly alongside Jacob Marcy for Team Italy, Owen Casey's been one of the best out of all the guys that have made their World Baseball Classic presence this year. It's been fun to see that defensive play. I loved talking about. I think it was an extra base hit in the gap towards the corner, and Casey grabs it, delivers a perfect strike to Otto Lopez, who's going to be his shortstop on the Marlins. Otto Lopez fires it to the catcher. They nab the runner at the plate. And that's just a perfect example of why defense matters. I think this Marlins organization sees that. They've put an emphasis on that, and it's paying off for these guys at the WBC.
And I have some stats for people that really want to microanalyze pool play. This is from every Marlins hitter at least got into a game one way or the other. And this is, if you really want to dive into the numbers that they posted over the course of this pool play, Casey hit 500 with a 1458 OPS. That is peak Barry Bonds stuff over the course of those 4 games. The 3 doubles and the 1 home run. Yidi Cape really did contribute meaningfully to what Cuba was doing. An 891 OPS in his 4 games playing second base. And both Hicks and Gus were kind of underutilized by their teams. They're the backup catchers on their group. So Hicks just played that 1 game. But even in that 1 game, he had a caught stealing, and Canada ended up winning that game. And then Gus made that 1 start as well, I think, against the DR against Israel, in what was a relatively easy win overall. With Casey, it was impressive. Again, I do when looking at the particular pitchers that he was facing, I think the 2 most established ones would have to be Jaime Barria, who pitched a handful of years for the Angels, but not since 2023. That's the one guy that had a somewhat lengthy major league track record, and even he's been out of the loop for a couple of years now. And he also faced former Marlin Humberto Mejia, who people may remember from, was it the 2020 season that he actually came up and like a really young age, but he never really turned into anything. But he was a guy that was briefly a top 30 Marlins prospect, and he's also been way off the grid for the last handful of years. One of the hits that Casey got was against Mejia as well. He'll face better competition for sure coming up, facing the U.S. next. We'll get into the bracket in a moment, but next up, Canada in the quarterfinals is facing USA. So no matter who comes in, he'll be facing a much higher caliber of competition over the course of that game than he did over the previous few right there. As you mentioned, that relay play was, I'd say, the most defining highlight of the Marlins over the course of this pool play, just because you had 2 of them involved right there, cutting down that run. And with Casey, I didn't really have a strong feeling about his defense one way or the other, heading into this season. But for him to play it as well, that ball as well as he did, is pretty important. And we know what the Marlins, going by last year, that the standard for outfield defense with the Marlins is pretty high. Like, for him to take playing time away ultimately from Griffin Conine, or even from, if you're going to have Kyle Stowers out for any length of time, Kyle Stowers is a Gold Glove finalist last year. And Casey's never going to play center field for the Marlins, but it's not like he's going to have an unlimited leash to be on the field with this team when they have some solid alternatives, both offensively and defensively. And so for anything that he can show from both an arm strength, arm accuracy, route running, and just general instincts perspective is going to be really important. That's a separator, and that's going to take some of the pressure off his bat. So it's not only reliant on whether or not he hits right away for him to stick around. And we should shout out Marcy, who overall, you see the stats there, weren't particularly impressive. A 188, 350, 250 slash line, and only 2 RBIs, but those 2 RBIs were pretty important to pushing USA on in the tournament. Those came in that final game against Mexico that had this complicated tiebreaker where a higher scoring game is what the USA needed in order to advance, or they just needed Italy to win in general. And Italy checked both of those boxes. Marcy was the one who drove in 2 runs that officially made it a high enough scoring game so that the USA would kind of win the tiebreaker, regardless one way or the other, however that game played out. But so even though he's not the star of Italy to this point, it is cool to see that he is with a team that all of a sudden that really, I think whatever expectations people had for Italy, it wasn't that they were going to go undefeated in the course of their pool play. So how legit do you think Italy's chances are moving forward now that they've actually pushed through to the quarterfinals?
Yeah, well, Daniel called it right on the last stream. He said, look out for Italy. And sure enough, Italy goes undefeated in pool play. And at this point, I think it's fair to say that they should be taken as a legitimate contender to come out of that side of the bracket. They're going to face if they win their first round, they would probably go on to face Japan. I think Japan is consensus the biggest obstacle to the US, but the US lost to Italy straight up. And you can't always say baseball games are going to be played on paper. You know, we know who's going to win. You don't know who's going to win. You got to go out on the dime and you got to prove it. And Italy has a lot of very talented players. Jacob Marcy, Vinny Pasquantino, the 3 home runs the other day. Just they're all playing really, really well, and you love to see them play together. And Marcy, being a Marlins fan, to watch him play in front of the world and kind of announce his name with that big hit that drove in those two runs. I know it got through the right side of the infield. I know he hasn't done a lot at the plate, but it's still good because he's getting the playing time. A lot of plate appearances, 20 plate appearances, the most out of any Marlins so far. And he's got 4 walks. So that plate discipline hasn't left him from last year. So I'm excited for these quarterfinal matchups. I think we're going to see some good baseball.
I'm glad somebody brought this up because this also came up on we recorded a pod earlier today for Fish Unfiltered that will come out tomorrow about this exact same topic about the pronunciation of the name, whether it's Marcy or Marcy, because the broadcasters it's kind of been a mixed results where even with some Marlins games last year, I think Kyle Seeloff occasionally said Marcy, and I've heard it both ways. It's something we'll get clarification on shortly after the tournament from the man himself. I think he's been. I've gone with, as I've said on this pod, Marcy, and but I've heard it both ways from people that are trying to get it right. So I think, just generally speaking, he's just somebody that hasn't expressed a strong preference one way or the other. But we'll get as clear an answer as we can from him heading into the season once we get to speak to him again. But I'm glad this came up because this was something that I was thinking about earlier today, actually. And I also wanted to bring this up as well from Big Chungus. Would anyone agree with me to say that Augustine should not be in the WBC and should have stayed back at camp to take advantage as much as possible to work on his issue behind the plate, or just me? It's somewhat of a valid question to raise just because it became so clear that he was going to be the backup with DR. He's played one of the first 4 games. The way that the schedule lines up, it's not a lock that he's going to start any of the remaining games moving forward. They started him just as really more so to make sure that Austin Wells was properly rested over the course of pool play. And now with some extra off days moving forward, even if DR makes it all the way through, I don't think we'll see Gus make another start. And it's unclear whether he'll make another game because that's a team in the DR that has shown the best offense in the entire tournament to this point. There's not really anybody there that Gus is going to be pinch hitting for, even if I think a lot of his offensive potential, he's, whether it's offensively or defensively, not getting a lot of reps there. What is your take on this, Jeremiah, about him riding the bench over there when in taking what could end up being like 2 full weeks away from actual Marlins camp.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to Augustine's participation in the tournament, although he's the backup, this obviously means something for him to represent his nation, his country at the biggest stage in the baseball world. I mean, we've seen a lot of players speak out about how proud they are to be representing their heritage, their country. And so I think that's a big part of it is Augustine wants to be there. He wants to be on the team, even if he's not getting the ideal playing time. And then my counter argument to that comment also, I just don't know if 2 weeks is really going to matter in the long scheme of things for Augustine's development as a catcher. I think we all know that Joe Mack is the defensive catcher of the future. It's a matter of time. You know, these last couple of weeks, would it have made Augustine Ramirez an above average defensive catcher? Probably not. So I think him being on the roster and having that experience that not a lot of players necessarily get to have. It's an honor if you get to represent your country. It's been good.
And I'll say in his defense, by all accounts, his work ethic is not really a question. All the time he's put in both last offseason and again this offseason is above and beyond what the Marlins want in terms of the time that he spent on specifically working on his defense. So he's put in the effort already. And like realistically, when we're looking at how much spring training matters, a lot of the hard work actually is done before you get to spring training. If you show up at spring training and you still have some big issues in your game, there's only so much realistically that any sort of coaching can do to change that and improve you all of a sudden. Like you can not even single out Gus and point to a bunch of other different scenarios. You can point to Christopher Morel learning first base. Like the Marlins made it clear a couple months before spring training that he was going to be used a lot at first base. He started working on it in the offseason. Exact same thing with Griffin Conine as well. They were telling Griff months ago that he was going to be getting some reps at first base. So he worked independently to do that. So yeah, that's, even though I'd say it's more eyewash than anything to say that if he's back in spring training, he's catching these meaningless exhibition games a couple hours north of Miami, that shows, and that will really make much of a difference. That a lot of the hard work has already been done, and if it doesn't translate, it doesn't translate. And I'm not alone, and certainly Big Chungus is not alone in being kind of concerned about how that's going to translate moving forward. He's done what he can to this point to make the most out of his skill set, and realistically, it's probably not a skill set that is going to make a whole lot of sense at catcher moving forward. But I'll get into later in the show. I do think that he's going to get a long leash to catch early in the year, despite Mac being ready. Just because there's such a difference if he turns out to be playable at all behind the plate versus just being a DH only. And the Marlins are, they want to hold on to that hope as long as they possibly can until until they're forced to make a change. So I think in a lot of our opinions, that change may already be overdue for him to move off of that position. But I mean, by all accounts, he's going to be starting there at the beginning of the year. Something just to bring up with Mac is that he had a couple notable plays early on in spring, both offensively and defensively, and then really quietly, it's gone really downhill as a hitter. I think he's hitless in his last 5 or 6 games overall, in a way that I think takes out any of the suspense in terms of what the Marlins are going to look like entering the season. It's going to be Gus, it's going to be Hicks, and then Mac is going to wait in line behind them for and the exact timing of that is still going to be unclear. When exactly are they going to shake things up and incorporate him into things? But this is a look at the quarterfinal matchups, just so everyone's on the same page. It's Korea versus the DR. That's a game in Miami. USA plays Canada. That's one of the Houston games. Puerto Rico and Italy, that will also be in Houston. And then Venezuela versus Japan will be in Miami. I sped through this too much without even talking about Sandy. So we should talk briefly about Sandy and this outing that he had just last night against Venezuela. It was just an amazing scene. We had both Isaac and Kevin covering it in person. And I think even by the standards of the 2023 WBC, this was really totally awe-inspiring to see this crowd. I think it was the second largest crowd for a WBC game in that ballpark. So even compared to games last year, like the championship game and the ones that were true elimination games, this one that actually was not an elimination game at all had totally packed the place. This is a photo of it from, I think, right towards the start of the game. So it wasn't just that it filled in over the course of it. They opened up the gates like 3 hours early out of anticipation, and they got this crazy, crazy scene between these two teams. So for Sandy, it was exactly on the 3-year anniversary of his previous WBC start, which also came against Venezuela under very similar circumstances. And the performance overall, Jeremiah, was pretty similar to that previous one as well. He took the loss last time. This time, DR ends up winning it, but mostly on the strength of their bats. And yeah, not a particularly impactful performance by Sandy himself.
Yeah, I mean, the environment, like you can see from that picture, is just outstanding. Makes you want to be in the ballpark and experience that firsthand. You saw, if you saw Isaac Azut's post from before the game, right outside the stadium, the crowd coming in, it was electric. People are playing music, and it just seemed like an incredible place to watch a baseball game. Sandy, it's tough because he technically got the win. But, we live in 2026. I don't think the majority of fans dictate wins and losses as measuring a success of a pitcher. Sandy goes 3 innings, gave up 5 hits, 3 earned runs. He walked 2, struck out 3 against a solid Venezuelan team for sure. I mean, they have a lot of really good players, including Ronald Acuna Jr., who actually went hitless last night. Funny enough, their best player goes hitless. But, Sandy, I don't know. I'm glad that the Dominican Republic won because Sandy's on that team, and I want to see him get another crack at an opponent later on this WBC. But I would be lying if I said that particular outing inspired me, because you are facing a lineup that is stocked with major league hitters, and that's kind of going to be the competition you're going to face in the regular season. And he didn't really do anything dominant. Coming off of a start, I believe it was against Houston, Eli, in which he went 3 shutout. That was where Snelling went 3 shutout and Sandy went 3 shutout. And then he kind of comes crashing back down to earth against good competition. So a little bit disappointing on that front.
In his defense, there were a couple grounders that weren't converted into outs that maybe could have been if he was playing in front of Otto Lopez and Xavier Edwards. There was a play in the first inning that allowed a run. Well, not directly allowed a run, but it made it easier for Venezuela to score a run in that inning. It was a sharp grounder hit directly at the shortstop that he couldn't handle smoothly. I think it was Geraldo Perdomo that was playing there. And that's what Sandy, that's the reality with Sandy, that even when he's on top of his game, he's somebody that leans on his infield defense, and his infield defense is going to make a difference between whether or not sometimes makes a difference between whether it's a good outing or even a mediocre one, if depending on the sequencing of those batted balls and whether those plays are made or not. So that made it a little bit more difficult. Overall, no excuses, because there were several legitimately hard hit line drives as well in the subsequent innings after that, including Luis Ariz was able to get one over the first baseman's head for an RBI double. Now, WBC Ariz is a different animal compared to regular season Ariz. Like he's he's one of the best hitters, not only one of the best batting average hitters, but really one of the best, most productive all-around hitters, both in the last WBC and then again in this one. So maybe that was part of it. But yeah, but overall, it's just still a little inconsistent in terms of him commanding his pitches. Something that I brought up with Mazur, and so the fact that that's something they kind of have in common at times. That that Sandy, generally speaking, has the reason why there's so much faith in him moving forward is because the stuff has, in some aspects, it has come back. The velocity has come back overall, where he was like, the stuff doesn't move exactly the same as it used to, but because his arm angle has changed, among other things, since he came back from Tommy John, still like the velocity is there. Like he was sitting 97 last night and hitting 99, and he's still able to, he's still confident. He's still somebody that is going to throw strikes. And I think last night either walked 1 or 2 batters, but it's not usually going to get much more than that, even when he's fully stretched out in the game. It's more so about whether he's can get enough whiffs moving forward with his stuff and just overall avoid enough hard contact. So yeah, with last night, there was just too much hard contact, and part of that's the competition. But as you said, there is the caliber of the lineup that he faced, even though it has some very big bright stars. I think overall, like, it's not that much different to a lot of the lineups he's going to be facing over the course of the regular season itself. So we'll see. I think the biggest storyline coming out of this from Sandy actually was the fact that he is still very interested in pitching again in the WBC. So to look at the schedule, we're recording this on the 12th. He pitched on the 11th. And if DR makes it all the way to the championship, that'll be on the 17th. That'll give him 5 days rest in between, which is just completely normal workload, completely normal throwing schedule for a starting pitcher, even if he was back up in spring training. And if DR trusts him, despite these kind of shaky results in this game, he said he's going to be ready to contribute, whether it's as a starter or a reliever. And this is somebody that has not pitched in relief under any context probably since 2017 when he was with the Cardinals organization. So the fact that he's even receptive to doing that just shows how much this tournament means to him. I think we could get into like a longer conversation if we want about how invested emotionally a lot of these players are in the tournament itself. That's what makes it so cool. The fact that they care, they are just as they treat it in the same magnitude, if not even greater than an actual MLB postseason scenario, just because of how much pride they have in recognizing that this doesn't even come around every year. This only comes around every 3 years to represent your country and to be able to make the difference, and understanding that moving forward, these are all single elimination games. I think you can expect that if DR makes it to the championship game, that Sandy is going to wind up pitching in some capacity in that game itself. So that's what there's a couple of sides of that where you want him to, that's so important for him to do it, but you got to be a little bit nervous when you see the results this time around. You don't want him to be the reason why they end up ultimately losing that type of game, especially if it's coming against an even tougher lineup than the one he faced this time around.
Yeah, that would not be fun. If Sandy is the reason why Team Dominican Republic goes down. I do want to say, because I'm seeing some of these comments here about Sandy and not being the same, and whether he's washed or not. I think expectations sometimes have to be adjusted, not necessarily changed all the way. And we can root for the player, root for the person. But Sandy Alcantara won a Cy Young 4 seasons ago in 2022, and a lot has changed with him. He's gotten older. He's undergone a major surgery. I know Tommy John is something that a lot of pitchers have, but the rehab is grueling. The time you take off from baseball is grueling. And so readjusting our viewpoint on how we view Sandy sometimes has to be in consideration, because I don't view Sandy in the same level as a Tarek Skubal or a Paul Skeens. And sometimes I feel like there's this pressure from the fan base that Sandy's got to go out and throw 7 shutout, and he still can. That's still in the tank. But, these nights do happen. These games do happen where, like Eli was saying, the command could be a little shaky here and there, and we just have to recognize that, because a lot has changed in the 4 years post Cy Young. And the last point I'll make about the WBC, Eli, going back to what you said about the importance of it, I think it was Kike Hernandez, former Marlin, current Dodger, who's been in World Series, who's won multiple rings, and he said the WBC matters more to him than a World Series ring does. And I thought that was very interesting. You see that, of course, play out among a lot of players, a lot of from a lot of countries, not just Kike Hernandez, who's playing for Team Puerto Rico. I believe they're playing Thursday, or Saturday rather. Today's Thursday. Saturday against Team Italy. So that's going to be some must-watch baseball.
Mm-hmm. I want to take this opportunity while we're still talking about WBC stuff to plug our partners at SeatGeek. We're in the midst of the final week of the World Baseball Classic, and then pretty soon after that, it's going to be Sandy and the Miami Marlins taking the field for opening day. That's barely 2 weeks away from now. The only place for the best deals on tickets is SeatGeek, the #1 rated ticketing app with over 70,000 of its listed. It isn't just baseball. There are concerts and many other sporting events. Each ticket is rated on a scale of 1 to 10, so you know what you're getting, and you look for the green dots, which indicate the best possible deal. try to stay away from the yellow or red dots unless you're really desperate to get in the doors for that particular event. We have a promo code for you as part of our Foul Territory Network affiliation. Use Territory10 for 10% off your next set of tickets at SeatGeek. 10% off any tickets with promo code Territory10. Make sure you click the link in the description of this podcast. You can take a quick photo of that QR code on the screen. You can find it all any which way you want. That will lead you to download the app and have the code automatically added to your account so you can use it later. So thanks again to SeatGeek for sponsoring the show. And with that, we should get to some bold predictions. This is bold predictions week for us at Fish on First, something similar that we've done the previous couple of years as well. We have a podcast posted on this account, Fish Unfiltered, that really dives into a handful of ones where I like to strike this balance between picking things that are unlikely to happen, but ones that we still feel kind of strongly about. And, the point is to convey some sort of useful information to people about why we feel a certain way about a player or about a team, and why they could exceed expectations. There are also possibilities where you can make negative bold predictions as well. People that can fall short of certain expectations, or predictions. I love the ones that are just weird and ones that are kind of inexplicable, things that maybe foreseeing unique things happening for whatever variety of reasons. What I want to do first is pull up some of these fan submissions that we got from a tweet earlier today, where I wanted to hear what people were thinking when it came to this and what directions they might take this conversation. So just put out a tweet on the Fish on First account for people's spiciest takes of the season. We're going to scroll through these, and you just stop me when you see one that you find particularly interesting to you. So there's George Aguilera saying the Marlins will sell out 7 times this year, something that I don't believe they've ever done in a single season at Lone Depot Park for Marlins stuff. Robert Hansen with one that the Marlins will sign Sandy to an extension, something that I just couldn't resist pointing out that the last time the Marlins signed anybody to an extension was Richard Blyer 4 years earlier during spring training, one that didn't go particularly well. There's Chris Nunez saying the Marlins will win 70 games. Bruce Sherman sells the team to a Saudi investment firm. All the players and prospects are traded for even more prospects, and the stadium is destroyed by a hurricane. Put a lot of energy into coming up with that one. From Baseball Card Brothers, that Otto Lopez will have a 25 home run season. There was a good amount of Otto Lopez hype in these. Richard has Otto Lopez winning an MVP. I think I saw multiple ones in here that are very pro Otto. Otto goes 2020 and wins a Gold Glove. That's from Adam Pollock. And I think I'll stop with this Hans Herrera Navarro one, where he has Graham Pauley winning a Gold Glove and hitting 20 bombs. X will finish in the National League's top 15 in on-base percentage, and Sandy and Yuri will combine for 390 innings pitched. So we got very specific with that one. Yeah, I was curious about when the last time the Marlins had any 2 pair of pitchers combined for that many innings in a single season. And actually, it wasn't that long ago. The last time was when Sandy won the Cy Young. It was Sandy and Pablo Lopez that year that went over 400 innings, with Sandy pulling a lot of the weight. To me, the key with Yuri is just making sure that he is out there for that many, because they're going to reach 390. Then nearly half of those are going to come from Yuri himself. And he's somebody that has never come particularly close to a full season's major league workload. So that's one that I'm really looking forward. That's one that would have a very big positive impact on the team if they're both there. And that ties into the Adam Mazur injury pretty closely, because it is all the more important now for those frontline starters to actually stay healthy for the entire year. Otherwise, this team's going to, that's the vulnerability that this team has. If they lose any of those guys for a significant length of time, then there's just fewer options behind them to realistically keep the ship afloat.
I like that first part of Hans Herrera's Graham Pauley winning the Gold Glove, because the 20 bombs is interesting. I really think it just depends on the playing time. I think he has the power to do that. He would need a lot of at-bats, not necessarily a huge power bat, but adequate power. I could see that happen. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Graham with the Gold Glove, though. if we dissect this, sometimes it feels like the Gold Glove can be a popularity contest. And I would be willing to bet that if you went around and talked to most baseball fans, they're not going to know who Graham Pauley is. So it would take a spectacular, really special season where he's playing there every day, makes himself known to the rest of the baseball world for that to happen. But I like it. I like the Graham Pauley hype. I'm a believer. I'm also a believer in Otto Lopez. Otto Lopez, 25 home runs. We saw a huge power jump from year 1 to year 2 in the Marlins organization. I think 20 home runs is in there. 25 seems like a lot, but I think Otto Lopez is going to shock a lot of people. I've compared him this breakout season that I'm projecting for Otto Lopez to a Geraldo Perdomo type breakout. And Geraldo Perdomo, of course, had an excellent season with the Diamondbacks. I think Otto has that in the tank. We're going to see.
Yes, certainly Otto's somebody that if you look at the batted ball quality last year, he was somebody that was relatively unlucky, especially early in the season in terms of not having his well-struck balls translate to extra base hits in the way that they should. And that's such a big component of his game moving forward, where that could really be the difference between him being just a really steady everyday shortstop versus being one that has that Perdomo-like ceiling where he's an actual all-star and somebody that the Marlins can really build around more so than being any sort of placeholder at that position. From Marlin Maniac about the Miami's games played leader at first base won't be on the opening day roster. I saw that several times as well. Not a lot of faith in Christopher Morel holding down first base over the course of the entire season. In fact, that came up from Isaac as well in his unfiltered pod about Davison De Los Santos in particular, probably ended up getting a long run over the course of the season at that position instead of a Morel because of how unfamiliar he is. There were a couple on Jacob Berry from Cade Niehammer. This one about Jacob Berry getting at least 75 at bats for the Marlins this season. I think he's going to get called up at some point, but to get to 75, he's going to actually have to hit a little bit to stick around that long. So I would qualify that as bold as well. I think for the most part, a lot of these predictions are sufficiently bold and unlikely, but ones that it could actually happen, except for the ownership changes one. Peter Pratt jumped in on the new ownership by the trade deadline. I wouldn't rule out anything beyond this season when it comes to that, but certainly during the season, that's as bold as it gets. We've got some live bold predictions from bipolar Miami Heat fan about me becoming the Marlins manager this season. As I've gotten to learn more about Clayton McCullough, I think that he's going to be sticking around for a pretty long time. It'll be pretty difficult for me to overcome that. And then you taking over for Bruce, becoming the Marlins owner. This is from Brian about bringing back the teal in a new rebrand. It's about as bold as it gets. And then another one from bipolar Miami Heat fan about Jeremiah and Isaac Azut will be in the booth this season. I don't know. To take any games away from Tommy Hutton, I don't think that'd be a disservice to him. I think we have enough respect for him that even if there was that invitation, we'd let him get as many games as possible this year. And there quite a bit of Yuri positive ones as well. We mentioned the one about the innings pitch, but several related to the Cy Young from Scott Nemisto about him winning the Cy Young. We had several others related to that about him getting close to winning one as well. From Marlins guy about Robbie Snelling winning Rookie of the Year. That was actually a conversation point on Unfiltered, so I won't go too deep into that one. And then, some Chris Paddock optimism as well from Nathan about Chris Paddock having an ERA under 3. I think under 4 would be sufficiently bold. Under 3 would make that. I mean, no way. There's really no way around it. If he posts an ERA under 3, that's the best free agent signing in Marlins history.
I take an ERA from Paddock under 4.5 and be content with that.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing that I'm monitoring entering this season is how expectations have changed in a hurry for Chris Paddock, just based on some small sample size stuff, some intangible stuff. But I think he's an easy guy to root for, but maybe not quite that much. Even when he was kind of very briefly took the world by storm in 2019 when he was a rookie with the Padres. And even then, I think his ERA was back above 3 by the middle of the season that year. And So there's some precedent of him doing it for part of a season if you go way, way back to the start of his major league career, but otherwise not so much. And there were some more Otto Lopez loves, Gold Gloves. Tim Sozio saying Xavier Edwards and Otto Lopez will both win Gold Gloves. You know that X was a finalist last year at his position at second base. From Land, and then there's quite a few about the Marlins team performance overall. Landon Center, the Marlins make it to the NLCS. From Coogie, that the Marlins make the playoffs. From Falco Lombardi, the Marlins win 90 games, something they've only done twice in their entire franchise's history. And a couple Gus Ramirez ones. Interesting. I like this one from Chad Taylor about Gus having more stolen bases than homers. Something that was surprisingly close last year, despite him not looking or in any sense of the word being a fast base runner. He's still a very clever base runner and somebody that gets a lot of uncontested stolen bases by running on the right pitches. Last year, 16 steals against 21 homers, if I remember that correctly. So it's something that I think that still qualifies as bold, but something that probably would not be top of people's mind. From MIA Sports about Gus Bus hitting 35 homers, and then several others. The Marlins winning the NL East, something they've never done in their entire franchise's history. 85 wins and a wild card from Z. And then Yuri being a Cy Young Award finalist. And in doing so, he'll get traded before 28 from Big Hurt 1989. So I think it's, having read those, there's time for each of us to squeeze in a bold prediction of our own. Is there one in particular, Jeremiah, that is maybe, whether it's related to one of these previous ones or not, that you find that you want to stick out your neck and put on the record before we get to the season?
Yeah, I put it out on Twitter earlier. I retweeted that post. I said that the Marlins are going to have 2 players that hit at least 30 home runs, which of course has not been done since Jorge Soler hit 36 during his tenure with the Marlins. And the last time that 2 Marlins hit 30 or more was back in 2017 with Giancarlo Stanton, of course, who hit the league-leading 59 bombs, and Marcelo Ozuna. You have to go back to 2008 all the way before that to find the next time that multiple Marlins players finished above 30 home runs. That's my bold prediction. I'm going to stick with it. I think the Marlins have a few guys that could possibly approach that number. I'll give you some names: Kyle Stowers, Agustin Ramirez. Christopher Morel is a wild card to me. The power is sneaky. He's had a 20-plus home run season. If he gets the playing time, you never know. So we'll see. I think 2 players make it, though.
Mm-hmm. Do you have the imagination to see Kemp Alderman sneaking into that, somehow getting called up early in the year, sticking around? If you want to go even bolder, I guess he's the guy that has the potential to do that. And if we've mentioned Davison, and the fact that Davison, if Morel does not work out, then Davison he'll have a much bigger opportunity at first base. And if nothing else, he's somebody that brings a whole lot of raw power to the equation. He led minor league baseball in home runs just 2 years ago in 2024. That'd be a big wild card in that aspect. What I will point out, I should remind for people that have not really been following the gradual trends, like Lone Depot Park is no longer a particularly difficult place to hit home runs at. I think all things considered, you'd still say it skews as being a pitcher-friendly ballpark. But if the WBC is any indication, if you watch any of these Dominican Republic games and how often they hit homers, and I think that just kind of hammers home what's been a trend. The fact that the Marlins have brought in the fences a couple different times in the not too distant past at this point, that the ball travels, the ball itself doesn't travel quite as well at sea level as it does in these other ballparks, but the dimensions are tighter. And as we move into this era where hitters are more pull happy than they've been before, where they're going to parts of the ballpark that are easier to access. And Lone Depot Park is not a particularly hard place to hit home runs down those foul lines. So I think, just all things considered, even though this team itself, as you mentioned, the historical context, they haven't had very many of these standout home run hitters over the course of the season. It's the bar, I'd say the conditions are more favorable to hitters right now than they were even just a few years ago because of those type of changes, both to the game as a whole, and then specifically to this ballpark. I will mention one that I guess it was somewhat similar to what I've seen other people post, but I haven't seen this particular one that I'm still really high on Augustin Ramirez offensively, so high that I think he's going to be a National League All-Star this year. A guy that very briefly, you could say, was flirting with that last year when he was hitting so well early in the year, and there weren't a ton of other catcher alternatives in the National League, that despite that late start, he was kind of in the mix. But I think that his bat is going to really be awesome for, if not the whole season, then the vast majority of it. I think people are kind of maybe being a little bit exasperated with him as a player overall, just because of the frustration watching him defensively. And I know that there were the splits last year about him just being a dramatically better player as a DH than he was when he was catching. And to me, I think that that's kind of confirmation bias. People seeing him struggling behind the plate and then reading into it that he can't do both at the same time. Like, he can't be a good hitter and be catching at the same time. But I think history says that usually doesn't apply. I mean, what he showed last year in terms of not just his raw power, but his overall presence at the plate and like the surprising amount of contact that he makes. There's kind of been this generalization that he's somebody that would have that his approach, maybe not only his approach, but then maybe that there could be other limitations mechanically that could prevent him from being a good all-around hitter. And I think people his late season struggles are kind of distorting the reality of him and how gifted he is as an overall hitter. I think the Marlins are going to give him a long opportunity to catch at the start of the year, and that might frustrate people how long he is catching. But I think he's going to hit enough that even when Joe Mack arrives, that Gus is going to be in the lineup close to every day as a DH or as the second, third string catcher. I think the way that they force-fed him plate appearances last year kind of shows how much they value his bat. It really shocked me at times, like how big his workload was as a hitter last year. Like, even on these days, I was expecting him to have semi-regular off days the way that basically any other catcher does. But he was at times playing 16, 17 games in a row because of how much the Marlins wanted to see him at the plate. So even though the numbers last year were kind of disappointing, he's a below average hitter when all is said and done. His on-base percentage was the main thing weighing that down. It was well below 300. And generally speaking, I think he's always going to walk at a below average rate. But I just am so encouraged by what he can do offensively, even though I think he's going to be the best overall hitter on this team over the course of the season. I think despite what Kyle Stowers did last season, that's possible for Gus. It'll be less walks, but I think it could be just as much power, all things considered. And the stolen bases, don't overlook the value of the stolen bases, that he's still going to mix in there one way or the other. I'm still pretty high on him offensively, and think that he can, over the course of at least the first half of the season, ultimately All-Star is just a half season honor for a player. But I think he absolutely has the potential over the course of half a season to be in that kind of territory where he represents the Marlins at the All-Star game.
Just as the Marlins lone representative, or do you think there is another repeat performance maybe from Kyle Stowers and the Marlins get multiple All-Stars?
Yeah, this topic comes up, it feels like almost every year, because the Marlins almost always get limited to one All-Star, and it gets very easy to dream about them. It seems there's certainly the potential. If I think Gus can be an All-Star, and that we've seen Stowers do it last year, and that we know the upside that some of these pitchers have. To me, Yuri is the guy that I like second most as an All-Star this year. And we saw plenty of hype for him from the other bold predictions, just because his ceiling is so immensely high, and it's all about him. Well, there's a few things. Yeah, to be fair, I mean, that's kind of why even calling Yuri an All-Star for this year would actually qualify as a bold prediction, in my opinion, just because we haven't seen him pitch close to a full season, and he's somebody that still allows a lot of fly balls. He's somebody that still has some inconsistencies early in games. We've seen some first innings blow up on him even last year in a way that inflated his overall numbers. So to me, that'd be a bold prediction too. I'm probably going extra bold by saying Gus. But yeah, Yuri to me is the one that I think can also make a pretty similar leap, because as long as he stays healthy, the strikeouts are going to be off the charts. And he's somebody that the reason why he's such a bigly hyped prospect throughout his entire, for so many years, it was because he combines that stuff with that ability to throw strikes as well. So he's somebody that is going to be relatively efficient with his pitches, and if I want to point out something in particular, I feel like his changeup is going to be a bigger weapon this year than it has been in the past. That was something that stood out when he was a prospect, and I was kind of confused about how underutilized it's been when he's been in the majors. But that's the potential. That's where he really has the potential to pop as a complete pitcher. That'll give him an opportunity, especially to be more effective against lefties. So yeah, I think I won't make that an official bold prediction, but I'm super high on Yuri too.
I like it. I like it.
Is there anything in? I told you before we started recording that I didn't think we were going to get to 1 hour with just the two of us, but of course we did, because when there's less people on the stream, it just means that there's more room for me to ramble on stuff. So I hope people enjoyed that, and we brought them some real information to go along with this. Yeah, in addition to Fox One and in addition to SeatGeek, we are brought to you by Jet Ski Rentals of South Florida. So make sure to use our special promo code on their site. It's been scrolling across the bottom of the screen for an hour now. Fish on first, all one word at checkout. You save 10% at Jet Ski Rentals of South Florida as well. And I'm glad that we were able to fill the time, keep you guys entertained, and that we had quite a bit to cover on here. The full Bold Predictions pod is going to be up on Friday, wherever you get your podcast. That's with Isaac and Kevin and AJ Ramos. If you've been living under a rock, AJ Ramos, yes, the former Marlins All-Star closer, is part of our podcast moving forward every single week on Fish Unfiltered. And then I think in the future, we'll have him on some live streams as well. Can't wait for that. So yeah, wherever you're listening or watching this, you'll be able to find that pod as well. They went through more than 15 bold predictions over the course of that show that people are going to enjoy. And this time next week, I'm going to be down in Jupiter with the team itself. So we're going to have to get back to you guys in terms of when exactly we're going to do next week's live stream. It might be before the trip. It might be live from Marlins spring training. But we appreciate people tuning in. Thank you, Jeremiah, for keeping me company on this, for steering the ship on this podcast. And we appreciate everybody's support. So yeah, you can find all of our coverage at Fish on First. And again, just 2 weeks away from real Marlins baseball returning. We'll be plenty occupied between now and then with the WBC and then with the rest of spring training as well. Stick with us, and we'll bring you everything you need to know. So yeah, talk to you guys soon. As always, go Fish.